The moment she laughed at my investment dreams, I knew exactly which company I'd buy first. 5 minutes later, her boss called with devastating news about the acquisition. By dessert, she was updating her LinkedIn profile for unemployment. What city are you watching from? Drop it below and subscribe. Here comes an unforgettable story. Let me take you back to where this all began. 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning that seemed ordinary enough, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Sacramento, scrolling through my laptop while my coffee grew cold. At 60, most people expected me to be planning my retirement, maybe taking up gardening or joining a book club. Instead, I was researching something that would have shocked anyone who knew me: investment strategies, online trading platforms, cryptocurrency basics. You see, I've always been what people politely called resourceful. Less politely, stubborn as a mule with twice the attitude. When my ex-husband Gary walked out 12 years ago, leaving me with a then 8-year-old Danny and a pile of bills, everyone expected me to crumble. Instead, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I'd been everything you could imagine: night shift nurse, weekend catering assistant, freelance bookkeeper, substitute teacher, grocery store clerk. You name it, I'd done it with a smile on my face and steel in my spine. Not because I loved working 3 jobs, but because my son needed food, clothes, and a college fund. Danny grew up watching me hustle. He never saw me complain, never heard me make excuses. He learned that when life knocks you down, you get back up, dust yourself off, and figure out a way to win. That kid worked just as hard as I did, earning scholarships that made my sacrificial savings account look tiny by comparison. Now, at 20, Danny was a junior at UC Davis studying engineering. Smart, kind, and unfortunately, recently married to Melissa Hartford. Yes, that Hartford family. The ones with the tech money and the superiority complex to match. Melissa was beautiful, I'll give her that. Blonde hair that probably cost more to maintain than my monthly grocery budget, designer clothes, and a smile that could sell ice to penguins. She was also spoiled, entitled, and had never worked a day in her life. At 22, her biggest accomplishment was graduating from a private college Daddy paid for with a degree in something called communications studies. The irony wasn't lost on me. When Danny brought her home for the first time last Christmas, she'd looked around my modest 2-bedroom apartment with barely concealed disdain. "How quaint," she'd said, which in Hartford speak translated to, "How pathetically small and cheap." I'd smiled sweetly and offered her more coffee. "It's not much, but it's paid for," I'd replied, watching her perfect composure crack just slightly. They'd gotten married 6 months ago in a wedding that cost more than my annual income. Danny had tried to pay for some of it himself, but the Hartford machine had rolled right over his protests. Everything had to be perfect for their little princess. Which brought me back to that Tuesday morning and my laptop research. I'd been watching financial YouTube videos for weeks, starting with basic investment concepts and gradually working my way up to more complex strategies. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that I'd been playing it too safe with my money. My savings account was earning practically nothing in interest. My modest 401k from my various jobs was growing at a snail's pace. Meanwhile, I was watching young people online talk about making thousands of dollars in weeks through smart investments. The catalyst had been a video about a 30-year-old teacher who'd turned $5,000 into $50,000 in 6 months through careful stock picking and cryptocurrency investments. If she could do it, why couldn't I? I'd always been good with numbers. All those years doing bookkeeping for small businesses had taught me to spot patterns, read financial statements, and understand market trends. I just hadn't thought to apply those skills to my own wealth building. That morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened an investment account with $10,000 from my emergency fund. It wasn't money I could afford to lose, but something told me I wasn't going to lose it. The first week was terrifying. I started small, buying shares of companies I understood. Grocery chains, utility companies, healthcare providers, basic stuff. But I also put a small amount into a tech stock that my research suggested was undervalued. Within 2 weeks, that tech stock had doubled. I stared at my account balance, convinced there had been some mistake. But no, my $500 investment was worth $1,000. Just like that, Money I would have had to work 20 hours to earn at minimum wage had materialized overnight. That's when I really dove in. But what Melissa and her family didn't know was that their condescending comments about my little jobs had taught me something valuable about the service industry. I knew which companies treated their workers well, which ones were expanding, which ones were struggling with labor costs. All those years of working everywhere gave me insights that MBAs paid thousands to learn in business school. 3 months of careful research, strategic investments, and what some might call beginner's luck had turned my $10,000 into something much more substantial. Much, much more substantial. The beauty of it was that nobody suspected a thing. I still lived in my same apartment, drove my same reliable Honda Civic, shopped at the same discount grocery store. I'd learned from all those years of financial struggle that appearances could be deceiving, and money was only as powerful as your ability to keep it quiet. Which was exactly why Melissa's little performance at Thanksgiving was about to backfire in spectacular fashion. Thanksgiving dinner at Danny and Melissa's new apartment was supposed to be a peaceful family gathering. Melissa had insisted on hosting, probably to show off the expensive dinnerware and designer furniture that Daddy had bought them as housewarming gifts. I arrived promptly at 3 o'clock, carrying my famous green bean casserole and wearing my nicest dress. It was 5 years old and from Macy's clearance rack, but it was clean and appropriate. Melissa answered the door in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Donna," she exclaimed, air kissing near my cheeks. "How wonderful that you could make it." Like I might have had somewhere else to go. But I smiled and handed her the casserole. "Thank you for having me, sweetheart." Danny emerged from the kitchen, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Mom!" He wrapped me in a genuine hug, in a sea, the kind that reminded me why all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. "I missed you. Missed you too, baby." The apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Sterile perfection designed to impress rather than comfort. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place, and it felt about as welcoming as a museum display. Melissa's parents, Charles and Patricia Hartford, were already seated in the living room with drinks in hand. Charles gave me a polite nod, while Patricia managed a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Donna," Patricia said, "you look nice." The pause before nice spoke volumes. These people had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Thank you, Patricia. You look very put together, as always." Melissa bustled around the kitchen, clearly nervous about everything being perfect. Danny tried to help, but she shooed him away with increasingly sharp instructions. "The turkey needs to rest for exactly 20 minutes, Daniel. The potatoes need to stay warm but not overcook. Could you please just let me handle this?" I offered to help, but got the same treatment. Apparently, my decades of cooking experience weren't quite sophisticated enough for the Hartford family feast. We finally sat down to eat around 4:30. The food was actually quite good, though Melissa looked ready to faint from the stress of hosting. Danny kept the conversation flowing, asking about everyone's work and plans for the holidays. That's when Charles Hartford made his first mistake. "Donna," he said, cutting into his turkey, "Danny tells us you've been taking some sort of online course recently. Computer classes?" I smiled politely. "Not exactly computer classes. I've been learning about investment strategies and market analysis." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia actually put down her fork. "Investment strategies?" she repeated, as if I'd announced I was taking up exotic dancing. "At your age?" Melissa added, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was concern. "Isn't that a little ambitious?" Danny shot his wife a warning look. "Mom's always been interested in finance. She managed our household budget for years while working multiple jobs." "Oh, I'm sure she's very good at budgets," Patricia said with a patronizing smile. "But investment strategies are quite complex. They require significant education and experience." I took a sip of wine and counted to 3. "You're absolutely right, Patricia. That's why I've been studying so intensively. I've completed courses in financial analysis, market research, and portfolio management. I've also been doing practical application with a small investment account." Charles leaned forward with the indulgent expression of someone about to humor a child. "And how's that going? Made your first million yet?" The table erupted in polite laughter. Even Danny smiled, though he looked uncomfortable with the mocking tone. I smiled right back. Not quite 1 million, Charles. But I've had some encouraging results. I'm sure you have, Melissa said, her voice now openly condescending. But don't you think, at your stage of life, it might be wiser to focus on preserving what you have rather than taking risks? I mean, you've worked so hard for so long just to get by. There it was, the knife, twisted with surgical precision. Danny's face darkened. Melissa, that's inappropriate. What? I'm just being practical. Your mother has never had significant money to invest before. It would be terrible if she lost what little savings she has because she got caught up in some get-rich-quick scheme. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme, I said quietly. It's strategic investing based on careful research and analysis. Patricia laughed, actually laughed. Oh, Donna, you're adorable. But these online courses, they prey on people who don't understand how complex the financial markets really are. They make it seem simple when it's actually quite sophisticated. She's right. Mom, Melissa continued, warming to her theme, you should stick to what you know. Maybe a nice CD or savings account. Something safe. Leave the complicated investing to people who understand these things. People like them, she meant. People with inherited money and business degrees and family connections. I nodded thoughtfully. You might be right. It is complicated. The relief around the table was palpable. They'd successfully put the simple-minded working woman back in her place. Exactly, Charles said, raising his wine glass, to keeping things simple and realistic. I raised my glass as well, meeting his eyes with a smile, to realistic expectations. But inside my head, I was doing calculations, because 3 hours before dinner, I'd received an alert on my phone about a small tech company I'd been researching, a company that made software for restaurant management systems, a company called Precision Hospitality Solutions. A company where, according to my research, Melissa Hartford had just started working as their director of marketing. Her first real job, handed to her through family connections, of course. A company whose stock price was about to become very, very interesting. The weekend after Thanksgiving, I sat in my apartment with my laptop, a cup of coffee, and a growing sense of satisfaction. My investment portfolio now showed a balance that would have shocked the Hartford family into complete silence. Not bad for someone who supposedly didn't understand complicated financial matters. The tech stock tip from that YouTube teacher had been just the beginning. Once I started making money, I'd reinvested the profits into more sophisticated trades. I'd bought into 3 cryptocurrencies just before they surged. I'd purchased shares in a small pharmaceutical company 2 weeks before they announced successful clinical trials. I'd even dabbled in options trading, something that would have terrified me 6 months ago. The numbers on my screen were surreal. What had started as a $10,000 experiment had grown into something that could change my life completely. But the most interesting development wasn't my gains in tech stocks or crypto. It was what I'd discovered about Precision Hospitality Solutions. My research into the company had been thorough, as always. I'd read their financial reports, analyzed their market position, studied their competition. What I'd found was a company with solid fundamentals, steady growth, and one significant problem. Their director of marketing was completely incompetent. Melissa Hartford had been hired 6 months ago, according to public records. In that time, the company's marketing spending had increased by 400%, while their customer acquisition had actually decreased. She'd launched an expensive rebranding campaign that confused existing customers and failed to attract new ones. She'd alienated 3 major restaurant chains with poorly planned promotional campaigns that violated their franchise agreements. The company's internal reviews, available through a business intelligence platform I'd subscribed to, painted an even worse picture. Melissa was described as difficult to work with, unprofessional, and lacking industry knowledge. She was, in professional terms, a disaster waiting to happen, which was why I wasn't entirely surprised when I received a call on Monday morning from a business broker in San Francisco. Ms. Johnson? The voice was professional, efficient. This is Marcus Webb from Pacific Business Solutions. I'm calling about your inquiry regarding acquisition opportunities in the hospitality software sector. I'd submitted several inquiries over the past month, hoping to find investment opportunities in industries I understood from my service work experience. Yes, Marcus? What do you have for me? We've just received a mandate to handle the sale of a company that matches your criteria perfectly. Precision Hospitality Solutions. They're looking for a quick sale to an investor who understands the industry. I nearly choked on my coffee. Why are they selling? The original owner wants to retire, and the current management team isn't performing well. The numbers are solid, but they need someone with operational experience to turn things around. What's the asking price? When Marcus told me, I had to sit down. It was well within my current budget. Assuming I liquidated some of my more volatile investments, it would be a substantial purchase, but not an impossible one. The seller is motivated to close quickly, Marcus continued. They're concerned about further deterioration under current management. Would you be interested in reviewing the complete financial package? Very interested. Excellent. I can have the documents to you by this afternoon. There is one complication, though. The sale would need to close before December 15th for tax purposes. That gives us less than 3 weeks. That's not a problem. After I hung up, I stared out my window at the Sacramento skyline, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of one phone call, I'd gone from being a casual investor to a potential business owner. More importantly, I'd gone from being Melissa Hartford's scorned mother-in-law to potentially being her boss. The irony was delicious. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the company documents Marcus sent over. Everything confirmed my research. Solid business model, loyal customer base, strong market position, terrible marketing leadership. There was no mention of Melissa specifically in the acquisition materials, but I knew enough about corporate structures to understand that new ownership typically meant management changes, especially when that management was demonstrably failing. By Wednesday, I'd made my decision. I liquidated several investments, transferred funds from multiple accounts, and made an offer on Precision Hospitality Solutions that was 5% below asking price, but came with a guarantee to close within 10 days. Marcus called me back within 2 hours. They accepted your offer, Ms. Johnson. Congratulations, you're about to own a software company. The next 10 days were a blur of legal documents, financial transfers, and due diligence calls. I hired a lawyer, an accountant, and a business consultant to help navigate the acquisition process. None of them questioned my ability to handle such a substantial purchase, which told me my money had officially bought me a different kind of respect. Throughout the process, I maintained my normal routine. I had lunch with Danny on Sunday, went grocery shopping at my usual discount store, drove my same Honda Civic. The only difference was that I now owned a company worth several $1 million. A company where Melissa Hartford was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The closing was scheduled for December 10th. I'd arranged to meet with the senior management team on December 11th to discuss operational changes and strategic direction. I couldn't wait to see the look on Melissa's face when she realized that her new boss was the woman she'd mocked for not understanding complicated business matters. On December 11th at 9:08 a.m. sharp, I walked into the offices of Precision Hospitality Solutions, wearing my best business suit and carrying a leather briefcase I'd purchased specifically for the occasion. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, greeted me with professional courtesy. Ms. Johnson? The management team is waiting for you in the conference room. Excellent. Before we begin, though, I'd like to review the current staffing structure. Could you provide me with employee files for the leadership team? Of course. Mr. Peterson, the interim general manager, prepared those for you. As Sarah gathered the documents, I felt a familiar surge of nervous excitement. It was the same feeling I'd had before every job interview, every first day of work, every moment when I'd had to prove myself to people who'd underestimated me. The difference was that this time, I held all the cards. The conference room contained 6 people, all looking varying degrees of anxious about meeting their new owner. I recognized most of them from the company website, but my attention went immediately to the blonde woman sitting at the far end of the table. Melissa Hartford looked exactly as polished and confident as she had at Thanksgiving dinner 2 weeks earlier. She wore a designer blouse and a smile that suggested she expected this meeting to go very well for her. She hadn't recognized me yet. I'd changed more than just my financial situation over the past few months. Regular trips to a proper salon had given me a more sophisticated hairstyle. The weight loss from stress and excitement had sharpened my features. Most importantly, expensive clothes and professional bearing had transformed my entire presence. "Good morning, everyone," I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. Thank you for being here. I know transitions can be unsettling, but I want to assure you all that my goal is to build on this company's existing strengths while addressing areas that need improvement. James Peterson, the interim general manager, cleared his throat. We appreciate that, Ms. Johnson. We've prepared departmental reports for your review, and we're eager to share our thoughts on strategic direction. Wonderful. Let's start with introductions and a brief overview of each department's performance metrics. We went around the table systematically. Operations, finance, customer service, and technical development all presented solid results with minor areas for improvement. Everyone was professional, prepared, and clearly competent. Then we got to marketing. Melissa stood up with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for poor performance. I'm Melissa Hartford, Director of Marketing. I've been with the company for 6 months, and I'm excited to share some of the innovative campaigns we've launched recently. I nodded encouragingly. Please, go ahead. For the next 10 minutes, Melissa presented a masterclass in corporate delusion. She described her rebranding disaster as bold market repositioning. Her customer alienation campaign became strategic market segmentation. The 400% increase in marketing costs with negative returns transformed into investment in brand awareness and market education. It was truly impressive how someone could spin complete failure into apparent success. When she finished, I smiled and made a few notes. Thank you, Melissa. Those are certainly ambitious initiatives. What would you say has been your biggest challenge since joining the company? Honestly, I think the previous ownership was too conservative in their approach to marketing. They didn't understand the importance of brand positioning in today's marketplace. I've been working to educate the team about modern marketing strategies. I see. And how would you measure the success of these modern strategies? For the first time, Melissa looked slightly uncomfortable. Well, marketing ROI is complex. You can't always measure brand building in immediate sales numbers. It's more about long-term market positioning and brand recognition. Of course, but surely there must be some metrics you use to evaluate campaign effectiveness. The discomfort was becoming visible now. We track engagement rates, brand mentions, social media growth. The numbers have been very encouraging. Excellent. I'd love to see those reports after our meeting. Melissa's smile became slightly strained. Absolutely. I'll have my assistant prepare a comprehensive analysis for you. I made another note and moved on to the technical development team, leaving Melissa to wonder what exactly I was writing down. The meeting concluded with general discussions about company culture, operational priorities, and my expectations as the new owner. Everyone seemed cautiously optimistic except for Melissa, who had grown increasingly quiet as the meeting progressed. As people began to file out, I called after her. Melissa, could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss the marketing department in more detail. She remained seated while the others left, her confident posture now replaced by subtle tension. When we were alone, I closed my notebook and looked directly at her. Melissa, I have to say, your presentation was quite impressive. Relief flooded her face. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I really believe in the work we're doing here. I'm sure you do. But I have to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. I leaned forward slightly. Do you have any idea who I am? The question clearly confused her. You're the new owner, Ms. Johnson. My full name is Donna Johnson. I watched as recognition slowly dawned on her face. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth opened and closed without sound. Hello, Melissa, I said pleasantly. How's that realistic expectation working out for you? The conversation that followed was brief but decisive. I explained that I'd be conducting a thorough review of all departments, starting with marketing. I mentioned that I'd be bringing in external consultants to evaluate current campaign effectiveness and ROI. I also mentioned that I'd be making staffing decisions based on performance metrics rather than personal relationships. Melissa left my office 20 minutes later looking like she'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, she had. She'd seen the ghost of every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh, every moment she'd treated me like an insignificant old woman who didn't understand complicated business matters. That afternoon, I received the marketing analytics she'd promised. The numbers were even worse than my research had suggested. Her campaigns hadn't just failed, They'd actively damaged the company's reputation and customer relationships. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed to make my next move. The termination meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at 10 a.m. I'd spent the weekend reviewing employment law, consulting with my attorney, and preparing documentation that would make the dismissal uncontestable. Melissa arrived precisely on time, carrying a thick folder that I assumed contained her defense against my anticipated criticism. She dressed even more carefully than usual, probably hoping that professional appearance might offset professional incompetence. "Good morning, Melissa," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat." She settled herself with forced composure. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson. I have those expanded marketing reports you requested, plus some preliminary ideas for Q1 campaigns. I appreciate your preparation, but we won't be needing those reports today." Something in my tone made her straighten in her chair. "Oh?" I opened the folder I'd prepared and pulled out several documents. "Melissa, this meeting is to inform you that your employment with Precision Hospitality Solutions is being terminated, effective immediately." The folder in her hands dropped to the floor, papers scattering. "What? You can't... on what grounds?" "Performance-based termination for cause. Specifically, gross mismanagement of marketing resources, failure to achieve established performance metrics, and conduct detrimental to company operations." I slid the first document across the desk. "This is a comprehensive analysis of your marketing campaigns over the past 6 months. Customer acquisition down 23%, client retention down 18%, marketing costs up 400%, and 3 formal complaints from major clients regarding unprofessional conduct." Her face went through several color changes. "Those numbers are taken out of context. Marketing is a long-term strategy. You can't judge results over such a short period." "You're absolutely right about long-term strategy, which is why I also obtained these." I placed another document in front of her. "References from your previous 2 employers. Both cite similar patterns: budget overruns, missed targets, and poor working relationships with colleagues." Melissa picked up the papers with shaking hands. This is a vendetta. You're doing this because of what happened at Thanksgiving." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "Melissa, do you remember what you said to me that day? About sticking to what I know and leaving complicated business matters to people who understand them? I was just trying to be helpful. You told me I should focus on simple savings accounts because investment strategies were too sophisticated for someone like me. I didn't mean..." "You laughed when your father-in-law asked if I'd made my first million yet. You called my investment education adorable." Her composure was cracking completely now. "I apologize if I offended you, but personal feelings can't justify..." "Personal feelings," I interrupted. "Melissa, this has nothing to do with personal feelings. This is about performance. You've been objectively terrible at your job." I pulled out the final document. "This is an analysis prepared by our external consultant comparing your department's performance to industry standards. Your campaigns have performed in the bottom 10% of comparable companies. Your cost per customer acquisition is 340% above industry average. Your client satisfaction ratings are the lowest in company history." She stared at the numbers, her professional facade finally crumbling. "Please, Ms. Johnson. Donna, I need this job. Charles and Patricia will be devastated if I get fired. Danny will what? Be disappointed that his wife couldn't maintain employment at a company his mother owns?" The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. "You don't understand," she continued desperately. "I've never been fired before. This will destroy my reputation. No one will hire me." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before spending 6 months proving that privilege and connections can't substitute for competence and professionalism." I stood up and walked around the desk. "Your personal belongings will be packed and delivered to you by end of business today. Your final paycheck will include unused vacation time, but no severance package, as this is termination for cause. Security will escort you from the building." Melissa remained seated, staring at the documents as if they might change if she looked at them long enough. "One more thing," I added. "Our new marketing director starts next week. She's a 45-year-old woman who worked her way up from administrative assistant to department head at a Fortune 500 company. She understands that complicated business matters require actual knowledge and effort, not just expensive clothes and family connections. As I reached for my phone to call security, Melissa finally spoke. "What are you going to tell Danny?" "I'm going to tell him the truth, that his wife was fired for poor performance at a company his mother owns, the same mother you said should stick to simple savings accounts." Security arrived within minutes. As they escorted Melissa toward the elevator, she turned back one last time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It really is." The elevator doors closed, and I returned to my office. Outside my window, Sacramento looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier, but something fundamental had shifted in my world. For the first time in my life, someone had tried to humiliate me and discovered that I was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text message from Danny. "Mom, can we have lunch today? I need to talk to you about something." I smiled and typed back, "Of course. Sweetheart, I have some interesting news to share with you too. The best part about revenge isn't the moment of victory. It's the moment when your enemies realize they never really knew who they were dealing with in the first place." And Melissa Hartford was about to learn exactly what kind of woman she'd chosen to underestimate. Danny called me 3 times before I finally answered on Tuesday evening. I'd been expecting this conversation since Monday afternoon, when Melissa would have arrived home with her news about sudden unemployment. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was strained, tired in a way that made my heart ache. "Of course, honey. Do you want to come over or should I come to you?" "I'll come to you. She's not handling this well." An hour later, Danny sat at my kitchen table looking older than his 20 years. His usually bright demeanor was clouded with stress, and I could see the toll that his wife's dramatic meltdown was taking on him. "She told me what happened," he began carefully, "about the job." "I'm sure she did." I poured him coffee and waited. Over the years, I'd learned that Danny processed problems best when given space to talk through them without interruption. "Mom, I have to ask, did you buy that company because of what happened at Thanksgiving?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. Danny had always been perceptive, but I hadn't expected him to connect the dots so quickly. "I bought the company because it was a solid investment opportunity that aligned with my business goals," I said carefully. "The timing was coincidental." "Was it?" He met my eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd inherited both my intelligence and my low tolerance for deception. "Mom, Melissa said some horrible things that day. I was embarrassed by how she talked to you. You didn't say anything at the time." "I should have. I was caught off guard and I was trying to keep the peace. But I've been thinking about it for weeks, feeling guilty for not defending you." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Danny, you don't need to defend me from your wife. That's not your job." "Maybe not, but it's my job to make sure she treats you with respect." And she didn't. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Danny asked the question I'd been dreading. "How much money do you actually have, Mom?" I had 2 choices. Continue the deception that had protected both of us for months, or trust my son with the truth that would change everything between us. "Enough," I said finally, "to buy a multi-million-dollar company without financing." Danny stared at me for a long moment. "How is that possible?" 6 months ago, you were working 3 jobs to make ends meet. 6 months ago, I was working 3 jobs because I chose to live modestly while building an investment portfolio. I've been putting money away and growing it through strategic investments for longer than you think." "How long?" "Since you were 12. The confession hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. "You've been wealthy for 8 years and never told me?" "I've been building wealth for 8 years. There's a difference." I got up to refill our coffee cups, buying time to choose my words carefully. "Danny, when your father left, I had 2 choices. I could focus on survival, or I could focus on building something that would give us both freedom. But you worked so hard. All those jobs, all those hours. Those jobs taught me about different industries, gave me insights that helped with my investments. And they taught you that success requires effort, not entitlement." Danny leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "So when Melissa made those comments about your finances, about taking risks with your little savings, she was mocking a woman who could have bought her father's business portfolio 3 times over." A slow smile spread across Danny's face. "And when you fired her, I fired her because she was objectively terrible at her job. The fact that it was personally satisfying was just a bonus. Danny burst out laughing. Not the polite chuckle I'd expected, but genuine, delighted laughter that filled my small kitchen with warmth. Mom, you're incredible. Do you realize that? Melissa has been bragging to everyone about how her family has real money while Danny's mother works retail jobs. She's been so condescending about your situation. Not anymore. Definitely not anymore. His expression grew serious again. But I need to know, what happens now? With Melissa, with our marriage, with everything. I studied my son's face, seeing the man he'd become overlaid with memories of the boy who used to help me balance our household budget on this same kitchen table. That depends entirely on what you want to happen, Danny, and what kind of person Melissa chooses to be moving forward. What do you mean? Your wife has two options. She can accept responsibility for her professional failures, learn from this experience, and rebuild her career with humility and effort. Or she can continue believing that she's entitled to success without competence. Danny nodded slowly. And if she chooses the second option? Then you'll need to decide whether you want to spend your life married to someone who thinks effort and accountability are beneath her. As if on cue, Danny's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and sighed. Melissa wants to know if you'll meet with her. She says she needs to apologize properly. I raised an eyebrow. Apologize for what? She didn't specify, but I think she's starting to understand how badly she misjudged the situation. Tell her I'll consider it, but only if she can demonstrate that she understands exactly what she's apologizing for. After Danny left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. For the first time since Gary had walked out 12 years ago, I felt completely in control of my own life. But something told me that Melissa Hartford wasn't going to accept defeat gracefully. The meeting request came through Danny 2 days later, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of a humble request for forgiveness, Melissa wanted to discuss mutually beneficial solutions to our current situation. Even in crisis, the girl couldn't resist trying to negotiate from a position she didn't have. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where Melissa couldn't control the environment or call for backup from her parents. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table where I could observe the entire room. Melissa walked in precisely on time, and I had to admire her resilience. Despite everything that had happened, she looked polished and confident in an expensive outfit that suggested she hadn't quite grasped the reality of unemployment. Donna, she said, extending her hand as if we were business associates meeting for the first time. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I shook her hand briefly and gestured to the chair across from me. What can I do for you, Melissa? She settled herself carefully, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap. Everything about her posture screamed practiced composure, like someone who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. I want to start by acknowledging that there may have been some miscommunication during our previous interactions, she began. I nearly choked on my coffee. Miscommunication. Like accidentally saying, pass the salt, when you meant to say, you're too stupid to understand basic financial concepts. Miscommunication, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? I realized that my comments at Thanksgiving might have come across as dismissive, and that wasn't my intention. What was your intention? For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. I was trying to be helpful, to protect you from making financial mistakes that could hurt you in the long run. By publicly mocking my investment education and suggesting I was too old to understand complicated business matters. That's not how I meant it to sound. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Melissa, let's skip the carefully worded apology and get to the real reason you wanted this meeting. What do you want? The mask fell away completely, revealing the desperation underneath. I want my job back. That's not going to happen. But you could make it happen. You own the company. I own a company that needs competent employees, not charity cases with family connections. Her eyes flashed with anger. I wasn't a charity case. I was hired based on my qualifications. Your qualifications being your last name and your father's business relationships. That's not fair. Neither was your performance review. Melissa, in 6 months, you managed to damage client relationships, waste hundreds of thousands of dollars, and alienate every member of your team. Those are objective facts, not personal opinions. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a persuasive whisper. Donna, we're family now. Surely that has to count for something. Family? I smiled, remembering every condescending comment, every dismissive laugh. Melissa, family members don't mock each other's dreams in front of strangers. They don't make jokes about each other's intelligence or suggest that age disqualifies someone from pursuing new goals. I apologized for that. No, you acknowledged that there might have been miscommunication. That's not the same thing. Melissa's carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time. Fine. I apologize. I was wrong to say those things, wrong to judge your financial decisions, wrong to treat you dismissively. Is that what you want to hear? It's a start. But apologies don't erase 6 months of professional incompetence. Everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone deserves the consequences of their choices. You chose to treat me like an irrelevant old woman who didn't understand modern business. You chose to fail spectacularly at a job you were handed without earning it. You chose to spend the last 2 weeks blaming everyone except yourself for those failures. Tears were gathering in her eyes now, though I suspected they were more from frustration than genuine remorse. Please, she whispered. I need this job. Charles and Patricia will disown me if I can't maintain employment. Danny will lose respect for me. I'll lose everything. Then perhaps you should have considered those consequences before you decided to publicly humiliate the woman who would soon be signing your paychecks. I stood up, gathering my purse. Melissa, I genuinely hope you find employment that suits your actual skill level, but it won't be at my company. Wait! Her voice was sharp now, desperate. You can't do this to family. Danny won't stand for it. I turned back to face her. Danny has already been informed of your termination and the reasons for it. He supports my decision completely. That's impossible. He loves me. I'm sure he does. But he also respects competence and integrity, values you've yet to demonstrate. This isn't over, Donna. You can't destroy someone's career and expect there to be no consequences. I smiled, thinking of all the battles I'd fought and won over the past 12 years. Melissa, I didn't destroy your career. You did that all by yourself. I just refused to subsidize the destruction any longer. As I walked away, I could hear her making phone calls, probably to Charles and Patricia, looking for allies in a war she'd already lost. But I had a feeling this wasn't over either. The phone call came on Friday evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports for the company. Danny's name appeared on my screen, but the voice that answered was strained and unfamiliar. Mom, I need to see you. Tonight. Can I come over? Of course. Danny, what's wrong? I'll explain when I get there. He arrived 20 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 3 days since our last conversation. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from either exhaustion or emotion, and his hands shook slightly as he accepted the cup of coffee I offered. Danny, you're scaring me. What happened? He took a long sip of coffee before answering. Melissa's family happened. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What did they do? They hired a lawyer. They're claiming that you manipulated insider information to deliberately target Melissa's employment. They're threatening to file a lawsuit for wrongful termination, emotional distress, and, he paused, his voice breaking slightly, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. For a moment, the room spun around me. They're claiming I committed fraud? Charles Hartford has connections everywhere, Mom. Business connections, political connections, legal connections. He's convinced that there has to be something illegal about how you acquired the money to buy that company. I set down my coffee cup with steady hands, though my mind was racing. Danny, everything I did was completely legal. Every investment, every transaction, every business decision was documented and legitimate. I know that, and you know that, but Charles Hartford has enough money and influence to make your life very difficult while he tries to prove otherwise. What exactly are they claiming? Danny pulled out his phone and read from what appeared to be a legal document. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud, manipulation of market information for personal gain, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and wrongful termination based on personal vendetta rather than professional performance. Each accusation was more absurd than the last, but I understood the strategy. Charles Hartford was using the legal system to pressure me into reinstating his daughter, counting on the fact that most people would rather settle than fight an expensive legal battle. He'd picked the wrong woman to intimidate. "Danny, I want you to call this lawyer and set up a meeting for Monday morning. Tell them I want to discuss settlement terms." Danny's face fell. "Mom, you don't have to give in to their threats. We can fight this." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not giving in to anything. I'm going to end this once and for all." "What do you mean?" I smiled, thinking about all the research I'd done before buying Precision Hospitality Solutions. Research that had included detailed background checks on key employees and their families. "I mean that Charles Hartford has made the mistake of threatening someone who's spent months learning everything there is to know about his business practices." "I don't understand." "Danny, when you're considering acquiring a company, you investigate everything: the financials, the management, the market position, and the people involved. That includes background checks on family members of key employees. And Charles Hartford has some very interesting business relationships that I don't think would survive close scrutiny from the SEC. Danny stared at me. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder labeled Due Diligence, Hartford Family. Inside were documents I'd hoped never to use: financial records, business contracts, and communication logs that painted a very different picture of the Hartford family fortune. "Danny, did you know that Charles Hartford's investment firm has been under informal investigation by federal regulators for the past 18 months? "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves suspicious patterns in client account management, unexplained transfers to offshore accounts, and what appears to be a sophisticated scheme to hide investment losses from regulatory oversight." The color drained from Danny's face. "Are you saying Charles is involved in actual fraud?" "I'm saying that Charles Hartford is in no position to accuse anyone else of financial impropriety, especially when that someone has documented evidence of his questionable business practices." "How did you get this information?" "Professional investigators, public records, and a very thorough lawyer who specializes in corporate acquisitions. It's all completely legal, and it's all completely damning." I closed the laptop and looked at my son. "Danny, Charles Hartford is about to learn what happens when you threaten someone who's better prepared for the battle than you are. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give him exactly what he's asking for: a thorough investigation of financial practices. Just not the investigation he was expecting." Danny's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened further. "Melissa wants to know if you've agreed to settle yet. She says Charles is confident you'll cave rather than face public scrutiny." I laughed, genuinely amused by their misreading of the situation. "Tell Melissa that I'm looking forward to Monday's meeting, and tell her that Charles might want to review his own business records before making any more accusations about financial fraud." After Danny left, I made 3 phone calls: one to my lawyer, one to my business consultant, and one to a contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission who'd been very interested in the Hartford family's business practices when I'd shared my concerns 6 months earlier. Charles Hartford wanted a war. He was about to get one, but he might not like how it ended. The law office of Peterson, Weber & Associates was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, oil paintings of stern-faced judges, and a conference table large enough to seat a small army. Charles Hartford had chosen the venue carefully, probably hoping that the imposing environment would pressure me into submission. He'd underestimated both my tolerance for intimidation and my preparation for this meeting. I arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, accompanied by my attorney, Sarah Chen, and my business consultant, Michael Torres. Both were accomplished professionals who specialized in corporate disputes, and both had spent the weekend reviewing the Hartford family's financial records. Charles and Patricia Hartford sat at the far end of the conference table, flanked by their lawyer, a silver-haired man named Jameson Crawford, who had the kind of reputation that came with a 500 per hour billing rate. Melissa sat between her parents, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "Ms. Johnson," Crawford began without preamble, "my clients appreciate your willingness to discuss resolution of this matter outside of court." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "I'm always interested in avoiding unnecessary legal expenses." "Excellent. My client's position is straightforward. Ms. Hartford's termination was clearly retaliatory, based on personal grievances rather than professional performance. They're prepared to accept a settlement of $2 million plus Miss Hartford's immediate reinstatement. I looked around the table with genuine surprise. $2 million for firing an incompetent employee? Crawford's expression hardened. Ms. Hartford was not incompetent. She was the victim of a calculated attack by someone who used personal information and financial resources to deliberately sabotage her career. Sarah Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Crawford, before we discuss settlement terms, I think your clients should review some information we've prepared. She placed a document in front of each person at the table. I watched Charles Hartford's face as he began reading, noting the moment his confident expression shifted to concern. This appears to be a detailed analysis of Ms. Hartford's job performance, Crawford said carefully. Page 3, Sarah replied. Customer satisfaction scores. Page 7, budget variance analysis. Page 12, comparative performance metrics against industry standards. The room fell silent as everyone reviewed the numbers. Melissa's performance hadn't just been poor, it had been catastrophically bad across every measurable metric. These statistics are taken out of context, Crawford said finally, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Actually, Michael Torres interjected, they're taken from your client's own reports to company management. Ms. Hartford documented her own failures quite thoroughly. Patricia Hartford spoke for the first time. This is character assassination. You can't reduce a person's value to a spreadsheet. You're absolutely right, I said, which is why we also interviewed Ms. Hartford's colleagues, clients, and subordinates. Sarah pulled out another document. 17 separate complaints about unprofessional conduct, 12 instances of budget violations, and 8 documented cases of missed deadlines that cost the company-client relationships. Melissa finally found her voice. Those people were jealous of my education and family connections. They never gave me a fair chance. Ms. Hartford, Michael said gently, education and family connections don't qualify someone to run marketing campaigns. Results do, and your results were consistently poor. Charles Hartford had been notably quiet throughout this exchange, but now he leaned forward aggressively. None of this changes the fact that Ms. Johnson used personal animosity to target my daughter's employment. That's wrongful termination, regardless of performance issues. I smiled, recognizing the opening I'd been waiting for. Charles, I'm glad you brought up the subject of using personal animosity in business decisions. Sarah placed a new set of documents on the table. These were different: financial records, transaction logs, and regulatory correspondence. What is this? Crawford demanded. Evidence of your client's own business practices, Sarah replied. Specifically, Mr. Hartford's use of his investment firm to settle personal grudges and manipulate client accounts for his own benefit. The color drained from Charles's face. Those records are confidential. You had no right to access them. These records were provided voluntarily by the Securities and Exchange Commission as part of their ongoing investigation into Hartford Investment Management, Michael explained. An investigation that began 18 months ago based on complaints from several of your former clients. I watched Charles Hartford realize that his attempt to intimidate me had backfired spectacularly. You see, Charles, when you threaten someone with regulatory investigation, it's important to make sure you're not already under investigation yourself. Crawford was speed reading through the documents, his expression growing more concerned with each page. Mr. Hartford, did you inform me about any ongoing SEC inquiries before we filed these complaints? This is all baseless speculation, Charles blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Sarah continued, it's documented evidence of securities violations that could result in criminal charges. The SEC has been building a case against Mr. Hartford for almost 2 years. Why wasn't I informed of this? Crawford demanded. Because, I said calmly, Charles was counting on intimidating me into settling before anyone looked too closely at his own business practices. The room erupted in whispered conferences as the Hartford family huddled with their lawyer. I sat back and waited, watching Melissa's face as she began to understand the full scope of her family's predicament. Finally, Crawford cleared his throat. Ms. Johnson, perhaps we should discuss alternative resolution strategies. I'm listening. My clients are prepared to withdraw their complaints in exchange for a confidentiality agreement regarding these SEC documents. I pretended to consider this offer. Let me make a counteroffer. The Hartford family withdraws all legal complaints, issues a public apology for making false accusations, and Charles Hartford agrees to cooperate fully with the ongoing SEC investigation. That's unacceptable, Charles said quickly. Then we'll see you in court, I replied, gathering my documents. And Charles? The SEC investigation is proceeding regardless of what happens here. Your choice is whether to face it with or without additional charges for filing frivolous lawsuits based on false accusations. As we prepared to leave, Melissa spoke one last time. Donna, please, you're destroying my entire family. I stopped and looked at her carefully. Melissa, I offered you multiple opportunities to accept responsibility and move forward with dignity. You chose to escalate this conflict instead. But my family's reputation, my father's business. Your father built his reputation on other people's money and your family's sense of entitlement. I'm simply making sure the truth finally comes to light. We left the Hartford family in their expensive conference room, surrounded by their equally expensive lawyers, facing the reality that their attempt to destroy me had instead exposed their own corruption. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to your enemies. It's what you let them do to themselves. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of my newly renovated headquarters, watching the installation of a bronze plaque that read, Precision Hospitality Solutions, founded on excellence, built on integrity. The SEC investigation had concluded exactly as I'd expected. Charles Hartford was facing federal charges for securities fraud, client account manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud investors. His investment firm had been shut down, his assets frozen, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Patricia Hartford had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the criminal charges were announced, apparently deciding that she preferred to preserve her own assets rather than stand by her husband during his legal proceedings. And Melissa? Melissa had learned what it meant to face consequences without family money or connections to soften the impact. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Just finished my job interview. Think I got it. Can't wait to tell you about it over dinner tonight. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed in the 6 months since that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. Danny had used the chaos of his wife's downfall to reevaluate his own goals and priorities. Instead of coasting through college on his parents' expectations, he'd thrown himself into his engineering studies with renewed purpose. His marriage to Melissa was over, though the divorce proceedings were still ongoing. She'd moved back in with her mother and was reportedly working as a sales associate at a department store, her first real job at minimum wage. Ms. Johnson? My new assistant, Rebecca Martinez, approached with a clipboard. The Channel 7 news crew is here for your interview. I'd agreed to tell my story to the local business reporter, partly for the publicity, but mostly because I wanted other women to understand that it was never too late to take control of their financial future. The story of how a 60-year-old single mother had built a business empire through strategic investing had captured public attention in ways I'd never expected. Send them to the conference room. I'll be there in a few minutes. As Rebecca walked away, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 18 months ago, I'd been working 3 jobs and worrying about making ends meet. Today, I owned a thriving business, had enough money to last several lifetimes, and was being featured as an inspirational business success story. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the knowledge that I'd proven something important to myself and to my son, that resilience, intelligence, and careful planning could overcome any amount of privilege or inherited advantage. The news interview went well. The reporter, a sharp woman named Lisa Park, asked thoughtful questions about investment strategies, business acquisition, and the challenges faced by older women in the corporate world. Ms. Johnson, she asked toward the end, what would you say to other women who feel it's too late to pursue their financial goals? I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that security meant accepting limitations, that stability required sacrificing dreams. I'd tell them that the only thing worse than starting late is never starting at all. Age brings experience, perspective, and the kind of patience that younger investors often lack. Those can be tremendous advantages if you're willing to use them. And what about people who doubt your success? Who claim that luck played a larger role than skill? I smiled, thinking about Melissa's parting words about not understanding complicated financial matters. People who confuse preparation with luck usually lack both. Success requires research, timing, courage, and yes, sometimes a little luck. But luck favors those who do their homework. After the interview, I walked through my company's offices, observing the team I'd built over the past few months. Marketing was now run by that experienced 45-year-old professional I'd mentioned to Melissa, a woman whose results in 3 months had already surpassed Melissa's entire 6-month tenure. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to humiliate me for not understanding business complexity, Melissa had motivated me to prove exactly how well I understood it. My phone rang as I settled into my office to review the day's financial reports. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and his voice was bright with excitement. "Mom, I got the job. Junior engineer at Tesla's new facility. They said my interview was one of the best they'd seen." "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me about working for what you want instead of expecting it to be handed to you." After we hung up, I leaned back in my executive chair and looked out the window at Sacramento's skyline. Somewhere out there, Melissa Hartford was probably folding clothes and learning what it meant to earn minimum wage. Her parents were likely discovering that legal fees and criminal defense costs could drain even substantial family wealth. I didn't feel sorry for them. I'd offered multiple opportunities for respectful resolution, chances for them to walk away with their dignity intact. They'd chosen escalation over wisdom, arrogance over humility. As the sun set over the city, I pulled up my investment portfolio on my computer. The numbers were even better than they'd been 6 months ago. Compound interest, strategic reinvestment, and careful market timing had continued to grow my wealth at rates that would have seemed impossible when I was working 3 jobs to pay Danny's college expenses. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the numbers. It was in the knowledge that every dollar represented a choice I'd made, a risk I'd calculated, a strategy I'd executed successfully. At 60, I'd proven that it was never too late to rewrite your story. I'd shown my son what real strength looked like. And I taught an entitled young woman and her corrupt family that underestimating people based on age, background, or current circumstances was a dangerous mistake. The woman who'd been mocked for not understanding complicated investments now owned the company where her mocker used to work. The mother-in-law who'd been dismissed as financially naive had exposed and destroyed a family's criminal enterprise. Sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. My computer chimed with a new email notification, another acquisition opportunity, another chance to grow the empire I'd built from determination and careful planning. I smiled and opened the file. After all, there was still so much work to do. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.